Story 1. My twin kids, Sam and Robbie, who are 6 years old, were living with us a year ago. We resided in our previous house for 4 years, but certain events led us to move. It's a rather lengthy and unpleasant story. I had been living in that old house since before my wife Carol and I got married. It's also where we welcomed our kids into the world. However, the neighborhood was gradually deteriorating, which made us reconsider our plans to stay there long term. Our old house was situated on a corner lot, and behind us on the intersecting road was a house hidden behind tall trees and bushes. Consequently, we rarely saw those neighbors. On the right side of our house, there lived a neighbor named Steve. He had moved there less than a year ago, and my interactions with him had been limited. His heavy accent made it difficult to understand him, and he didn't come across as the friendliest person. 2 of Steve's windows overlooked our backyard, which lacked privacy due to this setup. However, I had never seen any lights on in those particular windows, leading me to assume that they were unused guest rooms or something similar. One summer day, as Sam and Robbie were playing in the backyard with their inflatable pool and water guns, I was outside doing yard work. At one point, while walking towards the detached garage, I noticed Steve briefly at his window. He quickly turned away from the window as soon as I spotted him, which struck me as slightly odd, but I didn't dwell on it. Later that day, as the sun began to set, the kids returned to play in their pool. It was scorching hot, so they were having a great time while Carol and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner. Suddenly, the kids' laughter ceased, and Robbie rushed inside, alarmed by a flashing light he had seen from the neighbor's window. I had to follow him into the backyard to investigate. He pointed to one of Steve's upstairs windows overlooking our backyard, mentioning a recurring white light coming from it. My immediate concern was whether it resembled a camera flash, which both kids confirmed. I decided it was time to bring them inside, dry them off, and discuss the situation with Carol. She shared my concerns and suggested I go next door to confront Steve. I knocked on his door multiple times, but he didn't answer, even though his car was in the driveway. Frustrated by his unresponsiveness, I returned home and informed Carol. The fact that he hadn't answered made the kids' claims seem more credible, even though we couldn't prove the white light was indeed a camera flash. We couldn't ignore the possibility. Several weeks passed before the next incident occurred. One night, Carol and I were in our bedroom when we heard the side gate being quietly opened and closed outside. Concerned, I ventured into the backyard, turning on all the lights. I found nothing and no one, but noticed that the lights in Steve's backyard were on. Peering over the fence into his yard, I was startled when he approached the fence from the other side, asking if I needed something. I inquired if he had seen or heard anyone sneaking through our yard, and he denied it. I then confronted him about the kids' suspicions of someone taking pictures of them while playing in the pool, which seemed to offend him greatly. He reacted defensively, almost shouting, making me reluctant to escalate the situation without concrete proof. I eventually apologized and returned home. Carol wasn't pleased with his reaction, believing he had something to hide. The next incident occurred several weeks later, in the middle of the night. I was awakened by Carol's panicked shaking. I rushed to the kids' room where Robbie was crying, and Sammy was crying in response. Robbie claimed he had seen someone outside the window and a camera flash. I was filled with dread, asking Robbie what the person looked like, but he couldn't provide a description. I brought the kids into our room to sleep in our bed with the lights off. Curiosity got the best of me, and I peered out our bedroom window across at Steve's unlit house next door. To my surprise, I saw him looking out one of the upstairs windows, the same room that overlooked our backyard. I stormed outside to ring his doorbell repeatedly, but he never answered. I decided to call the police and report Stevie, hoping that if more reports surfaced, they would investigate him. Strangely, I never saw him again. I occasionally sat outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, but he always seemed to avoid coming out when I was around. Within a month, we had moved to a different house in a nearby town, which proved to be a better place to raise our children. Story 2. About 3 months ago, I embarked on a new chapter in my life by moving into an apartment with 2 other women to attend college. The building we chose had its drawbacks, such as most apartment rooms facing a corridor frequented by fellow residents. This made it possible for anyone passing by to peer into our rooms if we left our windows open. Despite these inconveniences, the friendly atmosphere among the residents and the proximity to campus made the apartment a tolerable choice. One evening, as I prepared for bed, the distant sound of music drifted into my room. It mainly consisted of pop songs from the 2000s, which wasn't surprising given the neighborhood's reputation for student-friendly living and frequent parties. However, what followed was unexpected. I began to hear the unmistakable noise of drilling. At first, I dismissed it, thinking I might be tired and imagining things. Yet, as I paused the video on my phone to focus, the drilling sounds persisted. I got out of bed and wandered around the apartment, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. It was nearly 11:00 p.m., an odd time for anyone to be conducting noisy construction work. The drilling grew louder near my bedroom window, which faced the neighboring apartment, the one closest to my window. While I speculated that some maintenance or repairs might be underway, the late hour raised suspicion. I made another attempt to ignore the noise and return to bed. However, the relentless drilling continued to disrupt my night. Frustrated and unable to sleep, I finally decided to investigate further. I put on my robe and ventured outside, determined to confront whoever was responsible for the commotion. The window to the neighboring apartment was open, and as I approached, I realized that the drilling emanated from there. Nobody lived in that specific unit, so the situation became even more perplexing. I expected to find the workers hired to perform repairs, but what I encountered were 4 middle-aged men, all seemingly in their 30s or 40s. They paused their work and turned their attention to me, and at that moment, the only sound was the music playing from their radio. I hesitantly waved at them, hoping for a friendly response. However, they remained motionless, their stares fixed on me. It was eerie how they stopped all other activities abruptly. While I had initially desired peace and quiet, the sudden cessation of noise felt unsettling. What struck me as even stranger was their choice of music, which seemed incongruous with their age group, songs more suitable for teenagers or preteens. None of the men seemed surprised by my presence. Instead, they regarded me with puzzling expressions, devoid of emotion. I asked if they could postpone their activities due to the late hour, citing the early work hours of other residents in the building. Their response was terse, and they displayed little interest in conversation. One of them finally admitted that he lived alone in the apartment, denying knowledge of the individuals I had seen watching us from that window. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, I returned home with a sense of unease. As we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man behind the door was still watching us, his presence lingering in the back of my mind. The encounter was far more unsettling than we had anticipated. Back in our apartment, I retreated to my room. Our upstairs area only consisted of our master bedroom and the bathroom, with 2 windows, one of which faced the neighboring apartment. As I glanced out the window, I noticed those 2 individuals once again peering out from the same window across the fence. Despite the distance, I could sense their gaze fixed upon me. I hastily closed the blinds and went downstairs to inform Sarah of the eerie encounter. We decided it was time to plant some shrubs to block their view, although it was already late in the fall, and planting season had passed. We braced ourselves for the approaching winter. Update. It's been 2 weeks and those individuals haven't appeared at their window since. However, last night, we were startled by screams and yelling emanating from their house. The shouting was so loud that it penetrated through 2 sets of closed windows. Abruptly, the clamor ceased, leaving us on edge. We contemplated calling the police, but ultimately refrained. The unease continues to mount, and we're growing increasingly uncomfortable in our own home. We'll provide further updates if anything else transpires, but the situation has taken a disconcerting turn. Story 3. I reside in a rather ordinary suburban town on Long Island, New York, with my girlfriend Sarah. We recently began renting a small house, perfect for accommodating 2 to 4 people. Our home boasts a decent-sized backyard and is situated on a tranquil street. To one side of our house lies a water drainage basin surrounded by trees and vegetation, while the other side is occupied by our quiet neighbors, Kyle and his wife, a couple in their 60s. Directly across the street from us lies a patch of woods in front of another water drainage basin. This arrangement provides us with ample privacy in the front yard, but our backyard presents a different story. Kyle's house is shielded by some bushes planted by the landlord years ago, leaving only one house directly behind us that overlooks our yard. Regrettably, it's this single house that has been causing my girlfriend and me considerable discomfort. As I write this, it's currently the fall season, and we've been busy with fall cleanup in both our front and back yards. We've recently noticed an unsettling pattern. Every time we step outside, 2 individuals stand at the upstairs window of the house behind us. This unnerving duo consists of a middle-aged man and woman who fixate their gaze on us as we go about our activities. At first, we tried to ignore their constant watchfulness, but as the leaves continued to fall day by day, we found it increasingly difficult to endure their persistent presence. Leaves needed raking, and chores demanded our attention. Yet Sarah was becoming increasingly unnerved by the ever-watchful pair. One foggy day, while I was raking leaves, I glanced up at the window, and once again, the 2 figures were stationed there, staring intently. Pushing my unease aside, I decided to wave at them, wondering if they would respond. After smiling and waving for a few seconds, they remained motionless, their stares fixed on me. I shifted my gaze, feeling awkward and disconcerted, unable to continue my task. Ultimately, I gave up on the yard work and went inside, relaying my discomfort to Sarah. Sarah suggested that we introduce ourselves to our enigmatic neighbors. Initially hesitant, I eventually agreed, and we decided to take a walk around the block to their house and ring the doorbell. We anticipated one of the pair from the window to answer the door, but what unfolded was even more disconcerting. The door creaked open just slightly, revealing only half of a person's face. It was neither of the individuals who perpetually occupied the upstairs window. The interior of the house was shrouded in darkness, lending it an eerie and uncanny aura. Gazing at the half-visible face, it became evident that the person was significantly younger, possibly in their 20s. Sarah and I attempted to engage in polite conversation, but the young man appeared reserved and uninterested in talking. He exuded an air of indifference and responded with a curt, "What do you need?" When I inquired if he lived with others, such as his parents, his response was a straightforward, "No." I mentioned the man and woman who were consistently present at the upstairs window, but the young man behind the door claimed ignorance, insisting that he didn't know who I was referring to. Feeling increasingly uneasy, we left their doorstep and returned home, perturbed by the strange encounter. Strangely, as we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the young man was still observing us through the crack in the door, his presence lingering in our thoughts. Back in our home, I headed upstairs to our room. Our upstairs consisted solely of our master bedroom and the bathroom, featuring 2 windows, one of which faced the house behind us. As I glanced out the window, I discovered the same pair once more, peering out of the window. Despite the distance, their gaze appeared fixed upon me. Hastily, I closed the blinds and returned downstairs to inform Sarah of the unsettling development. We concluded that it was time to plant some arborvitae to block their window from our view. However, the late arrival of fall had left us with no option, but to endure the approaching winter. Update: 2 weeks have passed, and the two individuals have not reappeared at their window. However, last night, we were jolted awake by screams and shouting emanating from their house. The noise was so deafening that it penetrated through 2 sets of closed windows. Abruptly, the commotion ceased, leaving us on edge. Although we contemplated contacting the police, we ultimately refrained from doing so. Our sense of unease continues to mount, and we now feel increasingly uncomfortable in our own home. We will provide further updates should anything else transpire, but the situation has taken an even more disconcerting turn.